Okay, I'm going to try to quickly read a chapter before school starts. And the next chapter is If I Grow Up and starts on page 12. Who was that? Precious asked when I returned to the bench where she was talking to Terrell. Her eyes widened when we told her. You disciples? Not yet, Terrell answered. Even in the sun, the cold gradually seeped through your clothes. Precious shivered and hugged herself. You want to come to my place and watch TV? It was tempting. Neither Terrell nor I had ever been invited into a girl's home before. Maybe another time, I said. Terrell scowled at me, and I nodded toward Marcus's car. The corners of my friend's mouth turned down. Precious's pretty lips pursed. See you later. She started across the yard toward her building. Terrell and I rode around the yard, always keeping Marcus's car in sight. I asked him how Laquita was, and he said she'd cried all night. Jamar stay with her? I asked. Terrell shook his head. He got off his bike and started sliding around on a frozen puddle, leaving white scratches in the dirty brownish ice. If I grow up, I'm going to have a ride like Marcus's, he said through chattering teeth. He must have been freezing wearing only that hoodie, and chains and bling like you wouldn't believe. You know Rance got a solid gold chain that weighs 5 pounds? How do you know that? I asked. Rance Jones was the leader of the Gentry gangsters. I'd never seen him, and I was pretty sure Terrell hadn't either. I heard from someone, Terrell said, and he got a 25-carat diamond pinky ring. Them gangsters use kids 9, 10 years old. Maybe you should join them gangsters, I joked. Terrell gave me a sour look. Marcus is my first cousin. He should let me join the disciples. And get jumped in? I asked. To prove you'd be loyal to the gang, you had to let yourself be beaten up and burned with cigarettes. Terrell shrugged. Everybody else been through it. On Abernathy Avenue, a police cruiser stopped behind Marcus's car. The window went down, and Officer Patterson waved a thick brown finger at us. He was the only person I'd ever heard of who'd grown up in Frederick Douglass and become a cop. I slipped off the bench and went to see what he wanted. How you doing, Deshaun? He asked. He had a round face and a thick, bushy mustache. Growing up, he'd known my mother, and he always said hello when he saw me. Okay, I leaned in the open window. The car smelled like coffee. A shotgun and a computer were mounted next to the driver's seat. Officer Patterson nodded at the Mercedes. Marcus was that little boy's uncle, right? Yes, sir. Give him my condolences, okay? What's that? Tell him I'm sorry about his nephew. Yes, sir. Officer Patterson took a sip of coffee from a paper cup and brushed his mustache with the back of his hand. Gonna join the disciples someday? No, sir. Gonna stay in school and out of trouble. Good boy. Officer Patterson reached over and patted me on the shoulder. Then he drove off. I went back to the bench. What do you talk to him for? Terrell asked. He knew my mama. We huddled on the bench, shivering. The 3 identical buildings in the Frederick Douglass project loomed up like dirty tombstones. Half the windows were boarded over with wood. The grounds around the buildings were either cracked concrete walks covered with broken glass or hard-packed, bare, brown dirt with a few trees and some dead brown weeds. Benches lined the walks, but they were mostly broken. Same with the playground. There were no swings on the swing set, just rusty chains hanging down from the top. The seesaw was gone. What little sand was left in the sandbox was the color of dark smoke. Only the rusty monkey bars remained. As shorties, we used to play on them for hours and then go home with burnt red palms. We waited until Marcus came back. Then, shivering cold, we hurried inside. The lobby was lit by one long, flickering bulb. The mailboxes in the wall had all been busted open by drug fiends looking for welfare checks. The walls were covered with colorful, loopy graffiti and the black slashes of disciples' tags. Here and there, someone had hung a small Christmas wreath or a bunch of holly outside a door. The elevator was broken as usual, so we carried our bikes up the stairs. Some floors smelled of cooking, others smelled of weed. On some floors you heard loud TV, on others rap and hip-hop, and always in the winter the banging of the heat pipes day and night, like a prison gang eternally busting rocks. Taped on the wall of each landing was a blue sheet of paper saying that Darnell's funeral would be at 1 p.m. on Saturday at the First Baptist Church. Leaving my bike in my apartment, I helped Terrell carry his upstairs. The door to the Blakes' apartment was open, and inside it was hot and crowded with grown-ups. Even though it was the dead of winter, the windows were partway open and women sat fanning themselves. The few men, there were always way fewer men than women, dabbed their foreheads with handkerchiefs. On a table in the middle of the living room were plates of food and vases of flowers. It was getting toward the end of the month, and for a lot of people, food was running low. That was especially true around Christmas when there were presents to buy. The sight and smell of those heaping plates made my stomach growl. Terrell's cousin Laquita, Darnell's mother, was sitting in the middle of the couch wearing an old yellow house dress and clutching a tissue. Her eyes were puffy and red from crying. Terrell's mother, Mrs. Blake, sat on one side of her, and his Aunt Rosa sat on the other. Other than Marcus, I'd never heard that Laquita had any other family. When Mrs. Blake saw her son, she opened her arms wide. Terrell hesitated and glanced around as if embarrassed to be treated like a little boy. But then he stepped forward and let her hug him. "Terrell," she said in a sad voice, "you're the only good man that's left." She was looking over Terrell's shoulder at Jamar when she said that. Laquita's boyfriend sat with his elbows on his knees and his head hanging a tear tattoo beside each eye. He was tall and rangy, with hair split into cornrows. In his left ear was a big diamond stud, and his hands were covered with gold rings and tattoos. He raised his head and blinked hard, as if trying to squeeze out tears that weren't there. "If only I hadn't left him alone," he said woefully. People heard him, but no one said anything.